Hello guys, welcome to Redditor's Revenge. Here we post amazing revenge stories daily, and if you want more content like this, please do subscribe to the channel and stay tuned with us. Moving on to today's first story, in which OP exposed her spouse to the police after discovering he was an international criminal and flew from his country. Now story. 2 years ago I got married to my husband. He is a particularly normal guy, or so I thought. I met him while working as a real estate agent. I was doing an open house for a property I was trying to sell, and he came over, we chatted, and a couple of months later we were already dating and acting like a couple. When I wanted to know about his past, he told me he was an orphan, that both of his parents died in a car accident, and that he didn't have any brothers. His grandpa took care of him while he was growing up and, sadly, he passed away while my husband was still in college. I never minded that any of his acquaintances from his past didn't remain, so I could hear his stories, or in this case, verify that it was the truth. That was until I came across some of his things while cleaning his room. We have this kind of storage room where we keep old stuff that belongs to each other. One day while cleaning, I came across a box without any identification. I was intrigued since everything in there was supposed to have a label that described what was inside, so I opened it and found a bunch of official documents from several countries, and some old pictures. In one of those pictures, he was around 16 years old posing with another young boy. When I checked the back, I noticed it said, "With my dear brother." I was just overwhelmed by so much to digest. First of all, documents seemed like identifications, birth certificates, and bank account notes, all of them with several different names, but with pictures of him as if he was the person to whom the documents were referring. Second of all, regarding that photograph, my husband never spoke to me about any brother in his stories about his past. He told me he was an only child, and that made me start to question everything I thought about him, but I couldn't let him know. I needed to clear out all of these doubts on my own, so I tried to leave everything as I had found it. I did my best to seal up the box again, remove the old pieces of tape I had ripped, and act as if nothing happened. My dad is a powerful man. He has friends in several estate institutions, so I asked him to set me for a meeting with a man who was in charge of handling some of the registry offices in our city. I had to check my husband's identity. Was any of what he had told me about his past true? Perhaps I could find information about his brother and set my curiosity at ease. When I got to the civil registry office to take a look at everything with my own eyes, my dad's friend took me to a room and showed me his records. Every single one of his official documents was from recent years. His birth certificate displayed 2 names from people that were allegedly his parents, but both of them didn't have any records anywhere. There was an addendum explaining their documents were lost on some fire. My father's friend told me this was the classic way of working by corrupt officials that forged identities. As if he were reading my mind, my father's friend came to me and asked me to please don't confront my husband about his identity. People who resort to forging all of their identity documents tend to be dangerous, and unluckily I ended up marrying one of them. I asked him not to involve my dad in this. I wouldn't want to worry him, and he said he was okay with that as long as I talked to the police. He gave me the contact number of one of his closest friends that worked as an inspector at the local police station, and I agreed. We took the fingerprints that were in my husband's documents, hoping that by any chance, if they were run through the system, his real identity would come up. I got to meet with the police inspector. My father's friend had explained the case to him, so he gave me a rundown on what actions to take. First of all, he had assured me that an undercover police van would be around the block where I lived. He gave me an emergency number to call or send a text message to if things got ugly by any chance. He told me he would take the fingerprints and run them through the police system to check if anything came up from them. Then he asked me thoroughly about the documents I saw in that box. I explained to him that most of the documents were written in different languages, and some of them looked like birth records and bank information, but I didn't take notes on exactly what I saw. I told him I recognized France and German flags among them. He told me he would make some calls and get to the bottom of who was my husband. The whole issue had me very nervous. Having to pretend everything was okay around my husband took a toll on my nerves. I started distrusting his smiles and his tender words. It pained me deeply, but I couldn't do otherwise without knowing what was going on. A couple of days later, the police inspector contacted me again for a meeting. I needed some good news. Somehow I held hope that everything could return to normal, but that day I understood that it was something that just couldn't happen. He told me that the fingerprints didn't match anyone registered in our country. He had got in contact with several Interpol agents and hoped that the fingerprints would show up in the data of any of the countries I had seen in his documents. Through an extensive search, they found out that the fingerprints belonged to a deceased Thai man in a neighboring country of ours. It seemed that the people forging the identity were so thorough as to avoid registering any traceable information about my husband, so it seemed like we hit a dead end on that trail. I was feeling disappointed about the investigation, but then there was a glimpse of hope. The police inspector managed to share the info with Interpol, and looking at the info and my husband's recent pictures, they arranged a list of fugitives that might match my husband's case. He told me they didn't want to disclose any of that sensitive information until we had a solid lead on him, so he arranged a meeting between me and the agent in charge. I felt somewhat relieved, as if we were finally moving forward on this. The inspector gave me a number, and the next day, while my husband was at his work, I gave it a call. That same day I got to meet this Interpol agent at his local office. He asked me to repeat my whole story about how I met my husband and what I knew about him, took some notes, and told me I needed to get myself a copy of each of my husband's private documents I had found in that box. I told him I feared he might discover I was meddling through his stuff. He told me his men and the local police would be alert if anything happened, and asked me to set a date on which I thought my husband wouldn't be in the house to take pictures and save a copy of everything I could find inside it. I figured out a day on which he wouldn't be around, and we scheduled everything. The day came, and as I expected, my husband left the house to go to his work. I signaled everyone involved and went to the storeroom where the box was. When I started looking for it, it wasn't there anymore. I kind of panicked, since that could mean he noticed I was going through his stuff. Perhaps he already knew I was talking to the police, and maybe my life was in danger. It seemed impossible to me, but with all that was going on, I couldn't discard that possibility. The agent helped me to calm down and encouraged me to look for the box in other places in the house, so I did. I went through his closet, through my room, I even went through some of the kitchen cabinets, but it seemed like it wasn't anywhere. Then the agent asked me if there were any ventilation grids placed around the house. I hadn't thought about that. I knew there were a couple, but didn't remember the exact places. I finally got to one of them. I needed a screwdriver to search inside it, so I looked for it and opened it. It wasn't there, but I didn't give up. I managed to open the other one. It was placed behind the bathroom door. I stuck my hand inside it, and there they were, all of the documents I had seen the first time. I started taking them out and taking pictures of them with my cell phone, and then I noticed the clock. 3 hours had gone by. I documented everything as fast as I could, but then I received a message from the agent. Your husband came back to the building. I knew he came home at this hour to have lunch from time to time, but I didn't expect everything to take me so long. I kept taking the pictures. I was halfway through. Just when I was almost finished, I heard the entrance door opening. It was my husband. I closed the bathroom door as soon as I could. I heard his steps going to the kitchen and saying he was home and asking where was I. I greeted him from the bathroom with the calmest voice I could make. He asked if I was fine in there, and I told him I had a little stomach ache. He then tried to open the door, but I told him not to come inside. Things were pretty messy with my stomach, and I didn't want him to experience that, I said. He then insisted on bringing me some meds, but I told him I would come out soon. I could imagine the tension the agents must have experienced at that moment. I managed to read a message saying, "Just say the word and we'll be there." I didn't answer it. I opened the shower water valve, and as quietly as I could, I started placing every document inside the vent grid while I closed it. I watered my hair to look like I just took a shower and then came out. I did the part the best I could to pretend like nothing was happening inside. I greeted him, asked him about work, and apologized for not having any meal ready. I wasn't sure if he would come, I said to him. He seemed calm and just nodded along at everything, which kind of took me by surprise. We had a meal, and then I said in March the next part of the plan. I told him I wouldn't be in town for a couple of days the next week. I told him I was invited to a congress in our neighboring city, and that I needed to leave. The agent had told me that I needed to be away from the house for the day they would make the raid to capture my husband, so I needed an alibi to be away from the house without raising suspicion from my husband. When I told him, he took it calmly but started asking about every detail, and he made the hardest questions about the whole thing. I managed to keep the lie standing and faked a headache to avoid any further questioning. He wasn't the jealous type, so I started suspecting that maybe he was onto us. I sent the documents to the Interpol agent, and 3 days later he asked to meet me in his office. Then I got to finally know the truth about my husband. The agent told me they run the info, and it matched the profile of a Thai fugitive man that had around 7 years running from international justice. He looked for scams and fraud. His way of working was seducing rich ladies and getting them involved with his fishy companies to take all the money from them and run away with it. Eventually, his crimes piled up and he was forced to leave his country with a fake identity. He kept scheming in several countries, but the Interpol raised the alert, so forced to lay low. When he got inside our country around 3 years ago, just 1 year before I met him, we suspected. The agent told me they were going to do the raid the day after I'd left for my Congress. Everything was set up, so all I needed was to endure for a few more days. The day I was going to leave, I couldn't find the keys. I got nervous since I was trying to leave without my husband noticing. I looked everywhere as silently as I could, thinking my husband was asleep. But then I heard his voice coming from the kitchen. "Are you looking for these?" he said. I got scared but couldn't avoid going to where he was. He had the keys in his hand and stared at me. I said, "Yes, thank you for finding them for me," and then he changed the subject and said, "I hope everything turns out all right for you on that trip." He made a pause and said, "I'm going to miss you." I said, "It's just a few days, no need to make it so serious, honey," and he said, "You're right." He handed me the keys with a sad look on his face, went to the couch, and lit a cigarette. I said my goodbyes and he just told me to take care. I don't know if I was scared or sad about what was going to happen to him, but I had the biggest lump in my throat when I left the apartment. I stayed at my parents' house. The next day, when the raid was going to take place, I received a message from the agent. "Do not open any doors or receive anyone. We lost track of your husband." I thought he was making a run for it again. Later I discovered he went to the place where I worked and left a note. It was a note saying how much he loved me and hoping we would get a chance to go to my favorite restaurant when I got back. When he came back to the apartment, I got notice that he calmly surrendered to the authorities. They found him smoking a cigarette in the staircase, and when he saw the whole operation, he wasn't surprised at all. I still don't know if I was destined to become another one of his victims or if he expected to live the rest of his life married to me under that fake name, but I wasn't willing to find out. But he ended up getting a lifetime in prison and killed himself after 6 months. Now, here is the end of our first story. I hope you guys are enjoying my daily content. Guys, let me know what you would do if you were in the same situation. I had mixed feelings for him, but I hated him for cheating on so many women who might have loved him wholeheartedly. So before moving to the final story, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more awesome stories.
Now, moving to our final story about how OP took revenge on his entitled roommate because he threatened OP and said he was going to ruin his reputation, so OP destroyed his life. Now story. I went on a gap year from university. When I came back, I needed to find some flatmates. There were 3 guys from campus that I didn't know and this other guy, Dave, who is doing the same degree. Dave is probably 10 years older than me. Dave said he knew the other guys and they were cool, and everyone I talked to in positions of authority said Dave was a great person. Dave had been renting an apartment for 2 years, and his landlord had recently bought a deceased estate. He transferred onto that lease, and we moved in together. Dave was not a great housemate, but it wasn't anything too serious until the exam period. If things in the house weren't exactly how he wanted them, he would get angry. At the same time, he would not do dishes, and he would take up the most space in the kitchen and bathroom with his stuff that nobody was allowed to touch. The rest of us started to become friends, and we would eat together every night. At 6 p.m. Bill would come home and start prepping dinner. Then a bit later Kev and Pete would come home and help. I would join them and we would eat and chat, then go to bed. After exams, Dave started partying and coming home drunk. Then he stopped leaving the house but continued to drink. He started being angry over little things like making noises after 8 p.m. Who was eating his food? No one was. All he ate was bacon. My housemates are Muslim and I ate what they made. Especially towards Kev for some reason. One second he would love Kev and the next he would hate him. Dave lost his job a few days later. We felt bad and he was struggling to pay rent, so we started making him dinner. I'm a bad cook, so it was mostly the other boys, and they even made him an extra portion for lunch. The guys wanted to try something new. It required a blender. Dave walked in and accused the guys of using his blender, remembering they are making him dinner. Also, it wasn't his. Kev turns on the blender while he is talking and Dave snaps. Dave starts yelling and grabs Kev by the neck and pushes him outside. Our landlord begged us to give him a week because he had been perfect for the previous 2 years and she knew him through the church. I said if he was still a problem in 5 days, all 4 of us were leaving. Worrying about losing the 4 of us, she agreed. We went to the police and they took a statement but said it wasn't violent enough for him to get arrested, and the next day we sat him down and told him to stop drinking. I knew what was going to happen, so I made a plan. I was going to get him out. He got angry but let us pour his whiskey down the sink. He was shaking with rage as I poured. He was still sneaking drinks and was getting angry. The other boys are Asian and I and Dave are white, so of course, he started being racist. He started saying Kev was a duckhead for being disrespectful about the blender, and so he was justified in being aggressive. Every time he got pissed off, I would call him out. I told him I was going to take the path of least effort to get him out of the house. After 5 days, I called the landlord and said that Dave had to go. The landlord said Dave could move back to his original apartment. He saw this as a challenge to his dominance or something equally as stupid and said that it was his house. I made it clear to him that I had told the landlord he was still drinking. Then he started threatening me and he said he was going to ruin my life at home and uni. I set up a camera after he passed out from the vodka he wasn't drinking. Now it was a waiting game. The next day he started. I wasn't scared because he had been drunk every day for 2 weeks. He could barely walk, so when I got home he walked into the kitchen and started. I laughed at him and he got more annoyed. He let out a slew of abuse. I told him how much I hated him. I'm a white immigrant who moved here when I was a baby, so you can't tell. So he started comparing me to them, the other housemates, like they were lesser and now I was lesser. Then he started challenging me to fight him. When I told him I wasn't going to hit him, he told me that all the people of my background were tough. I was like, okay. Then he hit me. I deflected it. I'm not particularly big or strong, but he was super drunk, so it wasn't hard for me to dodge his punches. Bill came to see what was happening, so I told him to call the police. That was a mistake. While I was distracted, Dave hit me in the face. The police came and I was completely fine, so they couldn't arrest him for assault. It's a civil matter, but I could get a restraining order the next morning. He came out to taunt me after the cops left because he was still in his house. Pro revenge time. I got a restraining order. He isn't allowed with 500 meters of me or my uni. I spend most of my time in the field. Our field research center is at a public dock ad. Dave used to work as a mechanic there. He also picked up seasonal work at a few other places in the dock, like refueling and engine work. All the other universities have their field centers at the same dock. So basically he was banned from everywhere. So I took great joy in sending an email to all the companies in the dock, informing them that if he showed up there he violated the order. As part of the degree, we get 2 special licenses and there is a medical requirement. So I informed them of his drinking and he was put under medical review and had his license stripped from him and is unable to obtain a second license. The best bit, has he checked out equipment for personal use, which means he had to pay for it. He took it for a spin with our housemate's bill and asked him to pay him back, which is technically an illegal charter operation. I got a bill to write everything down and send it off to the relevant authority, so now he is under investigation for illegal charter operation. Also, the dates of his partying line up with his equipment rental and there are pictures of him drinking before and after he checked out the equipment. He has nowhere to live, so he is sleeping in his car. He has been kicked out of uni. He has to go to court for both assaults and the restraining order. He has to go to court for running illegal charters and operations under the influence. He can't ever finish his degree and he can't get any of the seasonal work he was counting on. Now, that concludes our video for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Guys, let me know what's your opinion about this story, and you can also share your stories about your asshole roommates in the comments section. So before leaving, please hit the like button and do subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with us for more awesome stories.